Thank you again. If you have questions, note them down. You can see that we'll be going across quite a broad range here. We now have Madeleine on GDPR and other aspects from the regulatory and ethics work stream. Madeleine.
Thanks, Ewan. So I'm here representing the Regulatory and Ethics work stream. I'm Madeleine Murtagh from Newcastle University. My collaborator, Professor Bertha Canopers, can't be here today, but she says hi. And Adrian is somewhere in the audience and doing all of the work to coordinate this, and just many thanks to both of my collaborators. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that's ongoing, some of the work that's done, but focus down to a couple of aspects of the work. So just to reiterate, we are taking this as a rights-based approach to responsible data. We're talking about everybody having the right to data to share in the outputs and the benefits of those data. So while there is a right to privacy and a right to the protection of that privacy, we are trying to activate and accelerate the right to the benefits of science as well. So this is the context into which all of our work is doing, as Ewan said yesterday, and others have repeated. So it does bear repeating. This afternoon, we're going to see 3 talks looking particularly at what does it mean to benefit from science, and how is that being actioned in a variety of ways. So I'm sure that will be of great interest to you all. There's a lot of work that's already been done. There's a toolkit for the ethical and regulatory work that we have already produced. There is much more to be done. One of the key things that we have developed perhaps over the last 12 to 18 months and have started to implement is this self-assessment tool. We are asking part of the process that was described earlier in terms of developing the products for GA4GH is ensuring that it goes through this assessment check. It's a self-assessment check, and it then comes back to the regulatory and ethics group, looking at, well, is this personal data? Is this going to be using personal data? If it is, there are a range of implications. Are there consents and other legal agreements that are needed? Is there oversight of that? Are there committees? Are there data access committees? Are there other processes of oversight that might be involved in developing these products when they come to that point of approval? Are there intellectual property implications? Tricky one. Is there any way in which the work might block access to data? We're all about data sharing. So are there implications there? And importantly, does it affect clinical decision making? Are there unintended consequences? Are there additional consequences that we need to be mindful of? It's not to say if it has them that we don't do it. It's to say, let us look at them seriously. And importantly, is there any way in which this perpetuates disadvantage or inequalities? We also talked this morning about the need for the information that comes out to be comprehensible. Is it in a language that is communicable to others? So you will hear much more about so I'm going to just focus in on a couple of the particular pieces of work that we're following up this year. The Your DNA, Your Say, you'll have heard about this yesterday if you went to one of the workshops. This is the work that Anna Middleton's going to talk about in the Rights to Benefit section this afternoon. So I'm not going to cover very much except to say it's huge. It's amazing. There's over 19,000 responses, and if anyone has had anything to do with doing surveys before, that is just a phenomenal amount of work. The reach is quite incredible. I think there are results now for 9 countries. There are numerous more, a number of additional languages it's going into, and I know that Anna is quite happy if anybody wants to volunteer to help. So thank you to Anna, and she'll talk more about that this afternoon. Just to give you an idea of where the reach is, these are the ones that are already done, and here are some of the proposed pieces of work in Sweden, China, Japan, India. So the other piece of work that I really want to talk to you about today, whether we are in Europe or whether we are outside of Europe, if we are talking about sharing data internationally, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, affects us all. Because if we're using data that comes from European citizens, the GDPR applies. As researchers, as people in clinical practice, as people in healthcare services and systems, this has had an enormous impact since its introduction in May this year. And the implications, how we work with it, what we have to do in relation to it for the sharing of data, the processing of data, it's still, some of the policies are still being worked out. As researchers, we need to understand parts of it, and we're very lucky that we have a bunch of clever lawyers who can actually interpret for us, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm a social scientist, I couldn't possibly do that, and knowing that that might be there to help is such a relief. The other thing that I should say, that Michaela Meyerhofer from BBMRI is going to be speaking about GDPR as well later this afternoon, so there's another opportunity to learn more. So this work is led by Ted Dove at Edinburgh University, and it was launched in August. The purpose is to discuss and disseminate information about the GDPR in bite-size, 1 page, 400 words, no more, bite-size distillations of particular aspects of the work of the implications of the GDPR. These are going to come out as, there's a primer, a GDPR primer that's already come out and is available. I might actually I see some of you taking photos, so I'm just going to go back to this slide. Take a photo. This is how you get access to it. So if you want to subscribe, it's either one of those. So take your photos. I'm sure it's available.
We'll make it available for sure.
Yeah, but just to make sure. So there's going to be 1-page briefs monthly, and these will cover issues like, what's the territorial scope? What does transparency and accountancy mean in the context? We know these words, we use them in a whole range of settings, but what does it mean in the context of GDPR? What are the implications? What does data protection by design look like? So instead of going after the fact, and this is absolutely central to a lot of the work that we're doing, what are the new expectations of data impact assessments? What do we have to cover off for those? What is a data protection officer? What's their role? What are their responsibilities? What does consent mean? Consent, I'm sure that many of you have, in dealing with the GDPR, consent is a whole new beast. It has a legal definition, and in Genomics England, for example, we heard this morning that they're beginning to talk about patient choice, because within the UK, the Information Commission, but also within the UK, the Information Commission Office are making recommendations about how the term consent is used, because it has such particular meaning under GDPR. And for us as researchers, that is central. So what is consent? What does it mean under this particular regulation? Then special categories, what are the rights that that individuals, people, we talk about data subjects, they're actually people just like us. So what rights do people have in relation to the data that is there about them, that relates to them, that might be linked to them? What are the implications, particularly for us, around secondary use? This is what we do, sharing data, and of course, international transfer. So if you sign up, and I recommend you do, you'll get these monthly updates there may well be ones that go further than this, but this is the first-year program. I'd like to thank the people who are going to do this marvellous work and to send those out. And also, so that's really all I want to cover today, and to thank all of the people who are involved in the Regulatory and Ethics Working Group who contribute so much to the work that's going on. Thank you, everyone.